It's dividing the internet. You've got more big Trump, Epstein, Maxwell updates as Trump seems to be prepping a pardon, and Maxwell just filed a Supreme Court brief. Why the Sig Sauer scandal has the gun community freaking out. Federal agents just got exposed making false claims on LA protesters. And Trump just admitted there's real starvation in Gaza, but what happens next? We're talking about all that and even more on today's brand new Philip DeFranco show, your daily dive into the news. But first, an awesome announcement and a thank you. You guys made my new podcast, In Good Faith with Philip DeFranco, a top trending podcast on Spotify over the weekend. So thank you to everyone who's followed there and given 5 stars. And if you haven't yet, I'll make it the top link in the description. Definitely join. It's a great podcast. But that said, there is a lot of big news we have to talk about today, starting with this. You've got a Sydney Sweeney Nazi propaganda controversy playing out right now. Right? Because if you haven't seen, there's been this debate playing out after her new campaign with American Eagle just launched, where the tagline is Sydney Sweeney has great genes. Right? It's a play on words because the campaign is for American Eagle's denim line, but also genes like genetics. In some of the videos, they seem to use her genes to make a, hey, did you know Sydney Sweeney is hot joke, like this one.
My body's composition is determined by my genes. Hey, eyes up here.
Sydney Sweeney has great genes.
But then you've got a number of people feeling like others have a much different tone.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Sydney Sweeney has great genes.
And so you're seeing many out there feeling like that by emphasizing genetics, especially with Sydney's blue eyes and calling her genes great, the ad was essentially promoting eugenics, with some saying,
like a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white woman is talking about her good genes. Like, that is Nazi propaganda. I also am thinking about like all of the young girls who are doing their back to school shopping right now at places like American Eagle who are seeing ads like this. Yikes.
Praising Sydney Sweeney for her great genes in the context of her white, blonde hair, blue eye appearance, it is one of the loudest and most obvious racialized dog whistles we've seen and heard in a while. When those traits are consistently uplifted as genetic excellence, we know where this leads.
Right, and that as you had others writing things like, I like Sydney Sweeney and American Eagle as much as the next guy, but we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children is a crazy tagline for selling genes. As well as something about an ad sexualizing a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes while commenting that she has great genes feels extremely conservative, especially in this political climate. And that is, you had many blaming Sydney for participating in the campaign and claiming it wasn't just a commercial, saying it was a love letter to white nationalism and eugenic fantasies, and she knew it. With you also seeing tons of people in her Instagram comments pissed off at her, some pointing to the eugenics criticism and others just slamming her for doing another ad campaign that sexualizes her, with many of them saying that the campaign seems reminiscent of very controversial ads that Brooke Shields did with Calvin Klein when she was just a teenager, where she said nothing comes between her and her Calvins. And in one ad, she does a similar gene pun where she describes genetics. Right, but there, many felt that those ads over-sexualize her, and now you have people thinking that it's odd for American Eagle to reference a commercial mostly known for sexualizing a child. Now with this, you had others pointing to the fact that in American Eagle's press release, you had the company noting that it created a Sydney gene meant to raise awareness for domestic violence, with sales from those pants going to a crisis text line. But then you had many arguing that given how sexy the ads are meant to be, you would never know that this angle even existed. So, it just appears that there's controversies at every corner, with the criticisms notably growing especially loud over the weekend. With all of that said, Sydney Sweeney teaming up with American Eagle here, one, it appears to have actually been very good for American Eagle, at least as far as the stock price is concerned, with the stock seeing an initial massive jump, and then, with the backlash, there's been some fluctuations, but still it's been net positive. And two, you've also seen many people out there arguing that the backlash over this is overblown, right? Arguing that this is just a pun about Sydney Sweeney being very pretty, not a Nazi dog whistle. Though then also we've seen people landing in a third camp where they think, whatever is going on, it just didn't land. Writing things like, I don't think American Eagle is some sort of Nazi company, or this is even 100% on purpose, but it's definitely capitalizing on ever-growing fascist sentiment in this country. And so, while we're seeing this debate play out, and depending on where you go on the internet, just massively different reactions, I gotta pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts here? Which of these 3 camps are you landing in, and why? And then, next up in the news, you've got Trump's Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell scandal growing, getting worse, and now taking on new crazy forms. Right, because you have Trump out there shouting, we had the greatest 6 months of any president in the history of our country, and all the fake news wants to talk about is the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Trump seems to only be getting more and more exasperated as the Jeffrey Epstein scandal just won't die, with nearly a dozen sources telling the Washington Post that top White House officials underestimated the outrage, especially from Trump's own base, and he had hoped that the country would would forget about the Epstein files and just move on. But now, according to two people familiar with his thinking, the president's becoming increasingly frustrated with his administration's handling of the scandal, and he is concerned that it is overshadowing his agenda. And the concern, it's well-founded, as you've seen reporters pestering him with questions about Epstein at pretty much every single press conference since the DOJ memo. For example, one asking about the DOJ's meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell during Trump's briefing alongside the Philippines president last week.
I didn't know that they were going to do it. I don't really follow that too much. It's sort of a witch hunt.
And then you had another asking about the same thing ahead of Trump's meeting with the EU's president on Sunday.
I don't know anything about the conversation. I haven't really been following it. You're making a very big thing over something that's not a big thing.
And then during the meeting itself, after Trump revealed a US-EU trade deal, another reporter brought up Epstein again with this question.
Mr. President, was part of the rush to get this deal done to knock the Jeffrey Epstein story out?
Oh, you got to be kidding with that. No, had nothing to do with it. Only you would think that.
With Trump later saying something else that many picked out because of his really unsettling use of the word privilege.
I never had the privilege of going to his island, and I did turn it down, but a lot of people in Palm Beach were invited to his island.
And so now the White House is reportedly really fraying internally over the issue, with one person close to the situation saying this is a pretty substantial distraction. While many are trying to keep the unity in many ways, the DOJ and FBI are breaking at the seams. Many are wondering how sustainable this is going to be for all the parties involved, be it the FBI director or attorney general. Which really brings us to what options are left for Trump here. Because first, he tried telling his base to just shut the hell up about Epstein and forget about it.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein?
With Trump calling the people that cared about this stupid and weaklings, among other things. Right? And then when that didn't work, he tried offering them a few small appeasements, like releasing the jail cell footage, moving to unseal the grand jury testimony, or squeezing something out of Ghislaine Maxwell.
I just wish her well, frankly.
And then when that didn't work, he was like, what other shiny things we got? What about MLK files, treason allegations against Obama, a new probe into James Comey, an anti-woke battle against the Washington Commanders?
Barack Hussein Obama, have you heard of him?
And while some of that, especially the Obama stuff, has gotten more of his people in line, it has clearly not worked as a whole, with many seeing all these things as seemingly what they are, just distraction. In polling, it shows that Americans aren't happy about Trump's handling of the files. Plus, Democrats have happily latched onto the scandal, and Trump's own supporters, they seem very invested into this whole story and simply won't let it go after a news cycle. But, very notably, despite his frustration, Trump has reportedly been hesitant to pull one of his favorite levers during a scandal: firing people. And there you have someone close to the president telling the Post that he is afraid that it might create an even bigger spectacle. But regardless, Trump could expect more updates to keep Epstein in the news, at least for a while. Not only because it's been confirmed that his name is in the files, but also because his Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche wrapped up 2 days of closed-door discussions with Ghislaine Maxwell for any extra information that he could use to appease Trump's base. And there you had Blanche promising on social media that the Department of Justice will share additional information about what we learned at the appropriate time. And that, as you had Maxwell's lawyer telling reporters,
Ghislaine answered every single question asked of her over the last day and a half. She answered those questions honestly, truthfully, to the best of her ability.
But then notably, he added that Maxwell had supposedly been treated unfairly for the past 5 years.
She didn't get a fair trial. We're still appealing to the Supreme Court. Remember, a juror lied to get onto the jury. She was denied bail. She was treated worse than an animal would be treated in jail when she was first held, woken up every 15 minutes. So we're just trying to get through the process where we are now and get her some relief.
With him then going on to appeal to the president directly, claiming that the government previously promised not to prosecute Maxwell and suggesting that Trump, as a great deal maker, wouldn't break a promise like that. Which, in addition to other things, has led many to wonder whether Trump's going to pardon her in exchange for information, perhaps her silence, or even in an attempt to exonerate him while maybe weaponizing her against his enemies. And when a reporter asked him about this on Friday, we saw this play out.
Would you consider a pardon or a commutation for Ghislaine Maxwell?
I'm allowed to do it, but it's something I have not thought about.
With him then giving this more dismissive answer to the same question on Sunday.
A lot of people are asking me about pardons. Obviously, this is no time to be talking about pardons.
But regardless, Maxwell is set to testify in front of a House committee next month after it subpoenaed her. And that is, today, she asked the Supreme Court to take up her appeal and overturn her conviction, arguing that she was shielded by the same promise that her lawyer mentioned earlier. With that, referring to a non-prosecution agreement covering alleged co-conspirators that Epstein signed in exchange for his guilty plea. Though notably, the appeals court argued that the agreement was made with prosecutors in Florida and it doesn't bind the authorities in New York. And so with that, if the Supreme Court takes her case, we're expected to find that out sometime this fall, though once again, in her filing, Maxwell's lawyer noted that we are appealing not only to the Supreme Court, but the president himself to recognize how profoundly unjust it is to scapegoat Ghislaine Maxwell for Epstein's crimes. And so then notably, with this idea swirling around, you had NBC's Meet the Press asking House Speaker Mike Johnson whether he would support Trump pardoning Maxwell, and he showed off, let's call it his dodgeball moves.
Would you support a pardon or a commutation for Ghislaine Maxwell, a convicted sex trafficker?
Well, I mean, obviously that's a decision of the president. He said he had not adequately considered that. I won't get in front of him. That's not my lane. If you're asking my opinion, I think 20 years was a pittance. I think she should have a life sentence at least.
Then also that same day, Meet the Press interviewed GOP Representative Thomas Massie, who's become one of the most vocal critics of Trump and party leadership in recent weeks, with him previously criticizing Johnson for sending the House home for its 6-week summer recess early in an apparent effort to prevent them from voting to force Trump to release the Epstein files. And in response to the outrage, you had Johnson accusing Massie and others of trying to inflict political pain on their own party. But on Sunday, you had Massie shooting back with this.
I don't know why it should be politically painful to be transparent. Is the pain he's talking about that somebody in our party will be embarrassed by those files? Then that's not a good excuse.
Now later, you had Johnson defending himself by attacking the motion that Massie and Ro Khanna wanted to vote on.
House Republicans insist upon the release of all credible evidence and information related to Epstein in any way. But we are also insisting upon the protection of innocent victims. And our concern is that the Massie and Khanna discharge petition is reckless in the way that it is drafted and presented. It does not adequately include those protections.
But you had Massie flatly denying that, with him telling the program.
Roe and I carefully crafted this legislation so that the victims' names will be redacted and that no child pornography will be released. So they're hiding behind that.
Right, and then while all that's playing out, you have the two people who sparked this whole Epstein saga in the first place, right? FBI Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino. According to two sources who spoke to the Post, they've privately said that if they were in charge, they would have released the files while redacting victims' identifying information. And so with all that, this Epstein saga is shaking up to be one of the stickiest political scandals that Donald Trump has maneuvered through so far, which is really saying something, because just over the past 6 months, I mean, it's not even all of them, but you had Signalgate, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Qatar plane bribe, the Elon Musk feud, but all of those stories, they ended up blowing over within a couple of weeks. So some of the questions remaining is, will this Epstein episode eventually fade away like all the others, or is this going to be kind of one of those scandals that Trump just can't shake? Especially as you have more and more people arguing that it appears that Donald Trump is telegraphing a pardon for Maxwell. And then you've got more news in just a minute, but first, let's talk focus. Right? Who doesn't need a little help getting in the zone these days? Because I know I do. Between news updates, emails, the never-ending flow of information, it can be tough to concentrate. That is, until today's sponsor, Brain.fm, which has been a game changer for me. I've tried all the solutions, random playlists to background noise from YouTube, but nothing helped me stay focused. Thing is, unlike those random playlists, Brain.fm's music, it's designed by scientists to sync with your brain's patterns, boosting your productivity. They've got different modes like deep work, creative, and motivation tailored to what I need at the moment. And for anyone who has ADHD, they have a mode specifically made for that. And for me, it just feels like it's helped me stay on track. I get in the zone faster and stay there longer. It's what I've been using as I've been setting up podcasts, expanding the network. It's been great. Plus, Brain.fm's technology was awarded a National Science Foundation grant for improving focus, which is super impressive. Even recently published a study in Nature that shows their music boosts attention networks and helps improve task performance. And again, especially for those with ADHD, even for folks like me, it's been a lifesaver when I need to get stuff done and when I want to relax or fall asleep. And say, if you want to try it for yourself, this is awesome. Get 30 days free by going to brain.fm/DeFranco or scan that QR code. That's brain.fm/DeFranco for a month of productivity boosting music. And then next up in the news, we've got to talk about how you have a 21-year-old airman dead and the weapon meant to protect him may actually be to blame, with now widespread accusations and viral videos pointing to the Sig Sauer pistol having major issues. So the man killed was 21-year-old Braden Lovin, who had been serving out on a base in Wyoming, but also beyond that, military investigators aren't giving many details. And officially, all we know is that, quote, the incident involved a firearm discharge that is currently under investigation by Air Force Office of Special Investigations and the Air Force Global Strike Command Safety Office in collaboration with the Air Force's security forces. With them then going on to add that at this time, no determination has been made regarding the nature of the discharge. And that, it had already raised some eyebrows, but then on Monday, you you had the base suspending the use of Sig Sauer's M18 pistol, which was followed a few days later by Sig Sauer posting on X, "Our hearts are with the service members and families impacted by the recent reported event at the F.E. Warren Air Force Base. We proactively offered assistance to the U.S. military as they investigate the incident and remain willing to help in furtherance of their ongoing inquiry." With all of that seen as a massive clue that the likely culprit was the M18 pistol itself, and it led to accusations that the gun can just go off. Right in that, I mean, it would already be a cause for concern since the M18 is used by all the military branches, but then you add in the fact that its civilian version, the P320, it's one of the most popular pistols in America, and there are a ton of people allegedly at risk. And so the big question at the center of this is, can the gun just go off? And this, it's where things get controversial, right? Some P320 owners and SIG itself claim that it's not possible if the trigger isn't intentionally pulled. And in cases where the gun does seem to accidentally fire, they often blame things like unofficial holsters for pressing on the trigger and allowing it to fire. However, this weekend you had a video by the Wyoming Gun Project going viral, and it showed that, yeah, it sure as hell looks like a P320 can fire unintentionally and in circumstances that should never lead to a gun firing. And this is also where I need to get a little technical, but I will make it quick. The SIG P320 is a striker-fired pistol, meaning that inside of the gun itself, there's a spring-loaded pin that flies forward when the trigger is pulled, that hits the bullet and goes boom. This is an extremely popular design across almost all modern pistols, with one of the only drawbacks being that it doesn't have a safety that actually prevents the firing mechanism from going off, unlike hammer-fired guns. Right? Instead, striker-fired guns generally have a funky-looking trigger since it has a mechanism that needs to be pressed to even continue pressing the trigger. And that is specifically to prevent the gun from accidentally going off if the trigger gets caught on something, since the circumstances of something squeezing the trigger in a way that replicates it being deliberately pressed is extremely unlikely. Now, with all that said, look at the P320 and you'll notice something instantly. It doesn't have what some call that dumb-looking trigger like a Glock does or any Springfield or almost any other striker-fired gun does. Now, that alone, it's not the end of the world, but couple that with the P320's allegedly poor build quality and it's a recipe for disaster, at least according to the Wyoming Gun Project. Right, and in the video, he uses a screw to simulate the trigger being slightly pressed and then starts doing things like pulling the gun in and out of a holster to see what'll make it go off. And what he discovered is that, and I'm skipping a lot of technical stuff here, is that the gun, it can go off if the trigger is slightly depressed and the slide, the top part of the gun, is hit.
There is no reason in hell, if you are touching, you're going through the firing sequence. Let's say you're taking up slack. You're a police officer and you decided you're going to shoot somebody and you're taking up slack in the trigger, and at the last minute they throw their gun down and you realize, oh, I'm going to stop. But you bump the slide, or you got your finger like that, and again, you go to reholster and it goes off. Or you're fighting with somebody and you put less than a millimeter of input in the trigger.
He then goes on to show that with the trigger barely being touched, all you have to do is press down on the slide for it to fire.
Let's see if we can touch the slide and get it to go off. Let's see if we can get it to go off again. Would you be able to?
And while a lot of people were just shocked that this was even possible, you had some pushing back and saying things like, "I set a brick on the gas pedal of my car and it drove off on its own." However, that kind of misses the point. Pulling a trigger is a binary thing, unlike a gas pedal. A gas pedal with almost any pressure will give some gas. A trigger is either the gun shoots or it doesn't. And as we've seen, it looks like you can press the trigger slightly and have the gun not shoot, but do that and then touch the slide and it can, which should not happen. And SIG has long claimed that the P320 will not shoot without a full trigger pull. And all of this is, I also should make it clear that the P320 does have other safety features to prevent accidental discharges, all of which were engaged in Wyoming Gun Project's videos. So even though the P320 lacks a trigger safety, it's supposed to have other things that stop it from just firing on its own. Though that being said, the lack of a trigger safety is still pretty crazy, as Ian from Forgotten Weapons has pointed out.
SIG did not put a trigger safety on the 320. Do you technically need it? No. It feels to me like they were very deliberate and left the trigger safety off as a way to differentiate themselves from the competition. Like, our triggers have a better press, they have a better feel, they don't have this little dingus hanging off the middle of the trigger because you don't need it, because we have all these other safety mechanisms, and that's why we're better. When in reality, I like that trigger safety, at least for me, the dingus in a Glock, that doesn't actually cause any real problem. It's not an issue with the trigger pull. And it very much does prevent accidental discharges with holsters, and that a trigger safety will often prevent from turning into a fired gun.
So this trigger situation appears to be bad enough, but it's also not the only alleged problem with the gun. You see, the Wyoming Gun Project measured about 0.5 millimeter of movement on the slide, which doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to other guns, it is. And just to give an example, here's Moistcritikal with his Springfield XD.
You go to like move the slide, there's not even like the slightest give in it at all. But again, maybe that's common in some way.
Which, spoiler, it's not. But, with all of that said, one of the big questions is, well, what happens from here, right? What's next? And with that, you have a lot of people just asking, are SIG pistols even worth it? Especially when you consider that all of this, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. SIG, they've already been involved in lawsuits because of this exact pistol already. Shortly after it was first released, there were reports that if it was dropped, it would fire, something that should not happen with any modern gun. And then there were more and more reports coming out that the gun was just going off, with one piece in 2023 highlighting that at least 80 people claimed to have been wounded without pulling the trigger. However, getting SIG to take responsibility, it's been extremely difficult. And so, for example, in the case where a drop P320 could fire, SIG only offered a voluntary upgrade rather than issuing a recall. And it's refused to acknowledge that the P320 is at all responsible for accidental discharges. So with all that said, as we're waiting to see how this plays out, you have people, well, the internet's gonna meme. And so you're seeing people meme about this with things like firearm safety rule number 1, treat every firearm like it's a SIG Sauer P320. But, in all seriousness, 1, there's obviously still gonna be an investigation into the death that sparked this whole thing. But also 2, regardless of how that turns out, SIG, they appear to have a PR nightmare on their hands. So also, that might be where that ends, because despite all the lawsuits, there might not be much recourse for people. And that because New Hampshire, where SIG's US operations are based, they just so happen to pass a law 2 months ago that kills product liability claims against gun makers based on the absence or presence of safety features like the special trigger striker fired guns normally have. That being said, though, if a different defect can be proven to be the reason that the gun goes off, then there could be some wiggle room there, but it's going to be a major roadblock. And so in the meantime, while we wait to see what happens, especially if you are a part of the gun community, I would really love to know your thoughts on this. And then you've got more news in just a minute, but first, I'm gonna sponsor myself to help support the show and let you know over at beautifulbastard.com, where of course it is the comfiest way to wear your feelings. You can get 25% off your order this week by using code TY25. And yeah, that includes bestsellers like the Yeah, No, I'm Fine tee, along with You May Not Fuck with Politics, but Politics Will Fuck with You, Emotionally Exhausted Tie-Dye, A Silly Goose in This Economy, and Don't Be Stupid, Stupid. The light and soft has been perfect for the summer heat, though I've personally been running in the tank tops that we just brought back. But again, yeah, all available at beautifulbastard.com, and use code TY25 for 25% off your order. And then, next up in the news, you need to know that federal immigration agents lied about some of the protesters that they arrested during the massive anti-ICE demonstrations in LA. So now, as a direct result, prosecutors have been forced to dismiss multiple cases. With all of this getting revealed in a wild new report from The Guardian, and according to court records seen by the outlet, Trump's Justice Department has charged at least 26 people with various federal crimes during the demonstrations, including assaulting and impeding federal officers. But prosecutors, they've since been forced to dismiss at least 8 of those felonies, many of which relied on officers' inaccurate reports. And specifically here, it appears that many of these cases, they stem from the first major protest in LA on June 7th and the subsequent wave of initial arrests. Right amid Border Patrol sightings and concerns of ICE raids, you had dozens of protesters gathering outside of a DHS office complex in South LA, with the officers involved responding by firing tear gas and flashbang grenades while some protesters threw objects. And after that, you had the U.S. Attorney's Office for Southern California filing a joint case against 5 protesters, charging them with assaulting officers, which notably is a felony that can carry a 20-year sentence. And with that, you had the Department of Homeland Security saying in a criminal complaint that as the crowd grew, 2 sisters named Ashley and Jocelyn Rodriguez had begun blocking officers' vehicles, alleging that a Border Patrol agent had attempted to move Ashley, but saying she resisted and shoved the agent with both her hands. Right, and claiming that Jocelyn, in an attempt to prevent her sister's arrest, grabbed the arm of one of the agents, with both then being arrested. And then in an investigative file, the DHS said that in response to the sister's arrest, another demonstrator named Christian Serna Camacho started to verbally harass agents and make threatening remarks, with the agency then further claiming that yet another demonstrator, Brayan Ramos Brito, then pushed an agent in the chest. And at that point, a 5th person, Jose Maljica, responded by using his body to physically shield Ramos Brito, and then elbowed and pushed agents before both men were subdued and arrested by agents. But then, according to The Guardian, later reports by the DHS itself, quote, reveal multiple factual discrepancies in the narrative initially presented by officers and prosecutors. Right, and so for example, while all 5 protesters were charged jointly, with the agency suggesting that the 3 men attacked agents in response to the sisters' arrest, records show that the women were actually arrested in an entirely separate incident. An incident that happened after the men had literally already been detained, with them reporting that a Border Patrol agent who had served as a key witness and was considered a victim of the assaults, quote, appeared to initially give inaccurate testimony about the order of events. Then later, when questioned, the agent clarified the timeline, with the correct series of events also being corrected corrected by a supervisor on the scene who apologized for the error, or with him chalking it up to the chaos of the events of that day. But then beyond that, The Guardian also viewed several videos that appeared to contradict DHS's initial version of events, with the outlet reporting that, quote, chaotic social media footage of the arrest of the sisters appeared to show an officer pushing Ashley, prompting her to briefly raise her hand, at which point 2 agents grabbed her and took her to the ground, and adding that Jocelyn was then seen briefly touching the arm of one of the agents on top of her sister, with them adding it's unclear who the DHS and the Justice Department were alleging were the victims in their purported assault. And then, in addition to that, DHS records show that a Border Patrol agent seen in the video standing near the sisters had received an email from a supervisor who said he was, quote, trying to tie that whole event together for prosecution and looking into a rumor that Ashley may have shoved this agent. But the agent told the supervisor she had just told Ashley to move and she didn't explicitly say Ashley had shoved her. But that also isn't the only video that appears to call the DHS's initial narrative into question. Right, The Guardian also says that it viewed footage that appears to directly contradict the claim that Mojica and Ramos Brito had physically assaulted the federal agent. Reportedly, a DHS special agent noted in a later report that defense lawyers had presented video they said was in direct contrast to the facts alleged in the initial complaint, with The Guardian then going on to claim that the footage, quote, appeared to show an agent pushing Ramos Brito, not the other way around, before he was taken to the ground along with Mojica, who was also not seen in the footage shoving or assaulting agents. And so as a result, within 2 weeks of the initial charges, the U.S. Attorney's Office filed motions to dismiss the cases against the 2 sisters as well as Mojica and Ramos Brito. Though the office, they only said that the charges had been dismissed, quote, in the interest of justice, but not providing any further explanation. And with all that said, the DOJ has since filed a new case against the sisters, charging each of them with a single misdemeanor, alleging they, quote, assaulted, resisted, opposed, impeded, intimidated, and interfered with Border Patrol. Though notably here, the agency hasn't provided any further details and the sisters have pleaded not guilty. Also, the department reportedly filed a misdemeanor indictment against Ramos Brito, but then they later said that it was erroneous and they rescinded it, only to refile it again in a different format. But, like the sisters, he has also pleaded not guilty to the new charge. Also, Mojica, who notably claimed he was injured during his arrest, has not been charged again. And in fact, Serna Camacho is the only one of the 5 defendants whose original charges are still pending, but even his case has been an absolute fucking mess. He was arrested 4 days after the protest after 2 unmarked vehicles rammed his car while his toddler and infant were inside and then deployed tear gas. It ended up being this high-profile incident that went viral after DHS shared the video on social media, sparking massive backlash. That said, the DHS has firmly defended the arrest, claiming that he had punched a Border Patrol officer at the protest and attempted to flee when officers tried to arrest him. Serna Camacho has denied those allegations, pleading not guilty in court, and according to The Guardian, while video from the protest showed him scuffling with an officer and raising his hand at one point, they said it's unclear if he made contact with the officer. And then beyond that, when Serna Camacho showed up to a recent arraignment, he reportedly learned that part of his indictment had named the wrong defendant entirely, with The Guardian describing it as a stunning error that has jeopardized one of the government's most high-profile cases. And actually, because of the delays caused by the error, Serna Camacho's lawyers have argued that the government's 30-day window to indict him have passed, so the case has to be dismissed, which in part is why we've seen many people slamming the handling of the case, especially because it's become so significant to the Trump administration due to the viral video. With one expert explaining, this is an extraordinary mistake and a dangerous embarrassment. The U.S. Department of Justice is supposed to be the pinnacle of professional and responsible criminal prosecution. When you can't get the name right, it calls into question all other factual assertions in those documents. It's way beyond a clerical error. It's smoke where there is likely fire. And so the whole situation with people being charged on false and misleading statements from federal officials, I mean, that is really wild. But it also comes amid reports that Bill Asaley, the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney for Southern California, has been struggling to secure grand jury indictments in protest cases. And last week, you had the Los Angeles Times reporting that his office had filed felony cases against at least 38 people for alleged misconduct, but many have been dismissed or reduced to misdemeanor charges, and they added, in total, he has secured only 7 indictments, which usually need to be obtained no later than 21 days after the filing of a criminal complaint. And then noting 3 other cases have been resolved via plea deal, with sources reporting that Asaley recently became so irate that he could be heard screaming at prosecutors at the federal courthouse in LA after a grand jury refused to indict a protester facing felony charges. And they claimed that he had yelled at a subordinate to ignore the federal government's justice manual, which says that prosecutors should only bring cases they believe can win at trial. With Asaley allegedly screaming at the prosecutors to continue securing indictments as directed by Attorney General Pam Bondi. Now, I will say, with that, a spokesperson for Asaley denied the Times' reporting, and Bondi has also defended him. But with The Guardian claiming in its latest report report that rapid felony dismissals are a major embarrassment for Asaeli, with him adding that former federal prosecutors have said that the dismissals appear to be the result of an unusual series of missteps by the Justice Department, with one former California state prosecutor even telling the outlet that it's unusual for the Justice Department to file and then dismiss cases like this, especially numerous felonies in such rapid succession, and adding, it seems this is a way to detain people, hold them in custody, instill fear, and discourage people from exercising their First Amendment rights. And then beyond that, you also had another attorney saying that it was uncommon for Asaeli's office to prosecute these kinds of he said, she said protest scuffles, right? Noting there that it takes away resources from normal priorities, including fraud, economic crimes, public corruption, and civil rights abuses, and then adding, federal charges are very serious and have real implications for people's lives. Even if it gets dismissed, it will be on someone's record for the rest of their lives. It carries a lot of consequences, so you want prosecutors to understand and appreciate the power they have. And then, next up in the news, there is real starvation in Gaza. The situation has gotten so horrific and fucked up. That's what you even have Donald Trump telling reporters today, a statement that is very notably a direct contradiction to what his buddy Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said lately. Because fresh off of his propaganda podcast with the Nelk Boys, he posted a video online saying,
there is no starvation in Gaza, no policy of starvation in Gaza, and I assure you that we have a commitment to achieve our war goals.
But today, while speaking to reporters with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, you had Trump being asked if he agrees with Netanyahu's statement there, and he said,
I don't know. I mean, based on television, I would say not particularly, because those children look very hungry, but we're giving a lot of money and a lot of food, and other nations are now stepping up. I know that this nation is, right
It's
here.
a humanitarian crisis.
Right.
It's an absolute catastrophe.
with Trump also later saying,
We can save a lot of people. I mean, some of those kids that's real starvation stuff. I see it. And you can't fake that. So we're going to be even more involved.
And then when it came to talks for deals, he did place some blame on Hamas, claiming that they're using the remaining hostages as a shield. But he overall referred to the situation in Gaza as a mess and emphasized a need for food distribution. And with that, you even had him saying that the U.S. will open up food centers, though details there are yet to come. Right, and all of this, it's notably coming in as over the past couple of days, starvation in Gaza has dominated the headlines. And according to the health ministry in Gaza, malnutrition has killed 147 people, including 88 children since the war began, with 14 reportedly dying in just the last day or so. And that is the UN's World Food Program has warned that 100,000 women and children urgently need treatment for malnutrition, and that almost 1/3 of people in Gaza, they haven't eaten for days. Right, and over the weekend, you had multiple outlets sharing devastating images of malnourished children, people trying desperately to get food, and more depictions of hunger there. We then also saw Israel beginning dropping food into Gaza, but aid groups, they fear that it's just not nearly enough to help with the situation. With, for example, a UN aid chief telling BBC that the aid delivered during a military pause was a drop in the ocean, and that the next few days are make or break. And so for now, we are going to have to keep our eyes on the situation, especially because, as always, words are words and actions are actions. And while you have many noting that it appears that Donald Trump is actually contradicting Netanyahu, you also have plenty of others saying that Donald Trump in the past has said we will take over and own Gaza, and then arguing that at the end of the day, Trump is supporting, if not at the very least, enabling this. But that, my friend, you beautiful bastard, is the end of today's show. But remember, just like last week, you are getting 6 new videos this week. So in addition to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, if you come back here on Friday and Sunday, I'll have something waiting for you. Which I will say, it was awesome seeing how many of y'all love those videos. But with that said, stay safe out there, stay sane out there, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.